April 22, 1915. 5 p.m. Ypres, Belgium. French colonial soldier Armand Lapointe sees something strange rolling across no man's land toward his trench. It's low to the ground. Yellow-green. Moving like fog, but fog doesn't move against the wind. Brouillard, someone says. Fog. But fog doesn't smell like bleach and pineapples. The cloud reaches the first trench. Lapointe hears coughing, then screaming. Men stumbling out into the open, clawing at their throats, drowning in air. His commanding officer shouts something. Lapointe can't hear it over the sound of 10,000 men trying to breathe. He has maybe 90 seconds to decide. Stay in the trench and face whatever that cloud is, or run into open ground where German machine guns are waiting. But this wasn't the first time the Germans tried to kill men without bullets. And what happened in the next 6 hours wouldn't just kill 5,000 soldiers. It would break something in every man who survived. Let me tell you where we are in this war. April 1915. The Western Front has been frozen for 6 months. Trenches run from the English Channel to Switzerland. Millions of men living in mud, dying for yards of ground that get recaptured the next day. Both sides are desperate. The French have lost 300,000 men since August. The British are bleeding out at a rate no one back home can comprehend. The Germans are being strangled by the British naval blockade. Their cities are running out of food. Something has to break. Ypres, this small Belgian city, is the last piece of Belgium not under German control. It's also the thing standing between the Germans and the Channel ports. If they break through here, they cut off the British Expeditionary Force from the sea. The entire Allied position in Belgium collapses. So yes, this moment matters. But not for the reasons you think. Because what's about to happen in the next 6 hours won't win the war for Germany. It won't even give them Ypres. What it will do is introduce something into human warfare that can never be taken back. A weapon so terrifying that soldiers on both sides will spend the rest of their lives afraid of the very air they breathe. The man who designed this weapon is already here. Fritz Haber, German chemist. Waiting in a bunker 3 miles behind the line, watching the wind. He's been waiting for 3 days. For 72 hours, thousands of German soldiers have sat in trenches knowing what's buried next to them. 5,730 cylinders filled with 168 tons of liquid chlorine. Enough to kill every man in a 4-mile radius if the wind is right. And now, at 4:47 p.m., the wind finally shifts. It's blowing southwest, directly toward the French colonial troops holding the line. In 13 minutes, those cylinders will be opened. And the men in those trenches, Algerian, Moroccan, Tunisian soldiers fighting for France, they have no idea what's coming. You need to understand who Fritz Haber was before this moment. Because he's not a monster. That's what makes this so much worse. Haber won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1918. Not for this. For something else. He figured out how to pull nitrogen from the air and turn it into fertilizer. Sounds boring until you realize that process feeds 1/3 of the human population alive today. The man saved billions of lives. He was also Jewish in Germany in 1915, which meant he spent his entire career trying to prove he was German enough. When the war started, he volunteered immediately. Told the Kaiser, in peacetime a scientist belongs to the world, but in wartime to his country. His wife didn't agree. Clara Immerwahr, also a chemist. The first woman to earn a doctorate in chemistry at the University of Breslau. She married Haber in 1901, and by 1915, she despised what he'd become. When he told her about the gas project, she called it what it was, das ist Perversion der Wissenschaft, a perversion of science. He went anyway. She stayed home in Berlin with their 13-year-old son, Hermann. But we'll come back to Clara. Because what happens to her is part of this story. If you're realizing this story is darker than anything you learned in school, leave a like, because what I'm about to show you rewrites everything you thought you knew about World War I. Right now, I need you to understand how this weapon was built. Not the chemistry, the psychology. Haber didn't invent chemical weapons. Both sides had been throwing tear gas grenades at each other since 1914. Stuff that made your eyes water, made you cough. Annoying, but not deadly. Chlorine was different. Chlorine is what you smell in swimming pools, except concentrated 1,000 times over. In low doses, it irritates. In high doses, it reacts with the moisture in your lungs and creates hydrochloric acid. You drown in your own fluids while your lungs dissolve from the inside. Haber knew this. He tested it on dogs first, then rabbits. The results were clear. It worked. Horrifically well. But here's the problem. How do you weaponize 168 tons of gas? You can't put it in shells. The explosion would destroy most of the chemical. You can't carry it across no man's land. You'd die before you got close enough. So Haber came up with something brilliantly simple and absolutely insane. Bury the cylinders in your own trenches. String them together with pipes. Wait for the wind to blow toward the enemy. Then open all the valves at once and let physics do the work. Gravity pulls the gas down. Wind pushes it forward. And because chlorine is heavier than air, it flows into trenches like water. There's just one tiny problem with this plan. If the wind shifts while you're releasing the gas, it kills you instead. The German soldiers assigned to this operation, Pioneer Regiments 35 and 36, were given gas masks. Sort of. Cotton pads soaked in a sodium thiosulfate solution. You tie them over your nose and mouth and hope. In training, they were told this weapon would save German lives by ending the war faster. What they weren't told, if anything goes wrong, those cotton pads might buy you 60 seconds before you die screaming. A German soldier named Willy Siebert wrote in his diary the night before the attack. We have been told this is humane because it forces surrender without bloodshed. I do not believe this. I have seen the test animals. There is nothing humane about drowning. Type the word Clara if you think Haber's wife was right about what he was doing. But I want you to understand, Haber genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. In his mind, this weapon would break the stalemate, shock the Allies into surrender, end the war by Christmas and save millions of lives that would otherwise be lost in the trenches. He wasn't a sadist. He was a patriot with a chemistry set and too much confidence in his own rationality. And the German High Command? They didn't even believe it would work. That's the part that makes you want to scream. They approved the gas attack, but they didn't position reserve troops for a breakthrough. They didn't have plans for what to do if the line actually collapsed. They thought it was a long-shot experiment. Worth trying, but don't get your hopes up. Which means when it worked, and it worked beyond anyone's nightmares, there was no one ready to exploit it. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. April 20th, 1915. 2 days before. The cylinders are in place. The pipes are connected. Everything is ready, except the wind. It's blowing east, toward the German lines. Which means if they release the gas, it kills their own troops. So they wait. German soldiers sit in trenches 5 feet away from pressurized containers filled with industrial death. Some of them claim they can hear it, a faint hissing like thousands of snakes. Officers check the wind every hour. Still wrong. Haber sends a telegram to Berlin, waiting on meteorological conditions. Across no man's land, French colonial troops go about their day. They repair trenches. They cook thin soup. They write letters home. Some of them notice the German trenches seem unusually quiet. No artillery. Barely any rifle fire. A few French officers wonder if something's coming. But intelligence has been reporting German preparations for an offensive for weeks. It's white noise at this point. April 21st. 1 day before. Still waiting. The wind shifts slightly in the afternoon. Now it's blowing north-south instead of east-west. Better, but not good enough. Haber needs it blowing southwest, directly at the French line. German soldiers are getting nervous. They've been sitting next to these cylinders for 3 days now. Some of them have started writing letters home, being very careful not to mention what they're actually doing. One letter, recovered after the war: "We are preparing something that will change everything. I am not permitted to say what. I hope I am not here when it happens." Here's something the history books usually skip: the warnings. On April 15th, a week before the attack, A Belgian spy reported seeing unusual cylindrical containers being unloaded at night near Langmark. The report was filed. No action taken. On April 17th, the French captured a German deserter who told them explicitly, "There are gas cylinders in the trenches. They're waiting for the right wind." The interrogator wrote in his report, "Prisoner appears to be spreading disinformation to induce panic. Recommend no action." On April 20th, a French reconnaissance pilot photographed the German trenches and noticed strange metallic objects that didn't match any known equipment. The photo was analyzed, then archived. No follow-up. 3 warnings. 3 chances to evacuate the frontline trenches, even temporarily, just to be safe. All ignored. Because chemical weapons were technically illegal under the 1899 Hague Convention. Both sides had agreed not to use poison or poisoned weapons. So when intelligence suggested the Germans might actually use gas, the French command's response was essentially, they wouldn't. It's against the rules. Which is a very civilized way to think. Right up until the moment you're wrong. What would you do? Stay in the trench with the gas, or run into machine gun fire? Comment, stay, or run. April 22nd. The day of. Morning comes. Wind check at 6 a.m., still wrong. Haber is getting impatient. His team has been ready for 3 days. His soldiers are exhausted from the tension. And he's getting pressure from Berlin to either do this or call it off. At 10 a.m., he sends another telegram, conditions unfavorable. Will monitor throughout day. The German frontline troops begin what they're calling readiness drills. They practice putting on their cotton pad masks. They rehearse opening the cylinder valves in sequence. From the French trenches, it looks like the Germans are preparing for a normal infantry assault, which is concerning, but not unusual. What the French don't see, the absolute fear in some of those German soldiers' eyes. Because everyone who knows what's in those cylinders understands that this isn't a normal attack. This is something new, something that might not even work. And if it does work, they'll be the ones who have to walk through the aftermath. 3 p.m. The wind shifts. Not much. Just a few degrees. But it's enough. Now it's blowing southwest at roughly 4 miles per hour, directly toward the French Colonial positions. Haber checks his instruments. Checks again. Sends a runner to confirm wind direction at multiple points along the line. At 3:47 p.m., he gives the order, prepare for release at 1,700 hours. 5 p.m. 93 minutes away. German artillery opens up, not a full barrage, just enough to distract, to make the French think this is a standard pre-assault bombardment. French troops take cover in their trenches, exactly where the Germans want them. At 4:30 p.m., German officers begin the final checks. They walk down the trench line, verifying every cylinder is accessible, every valve is operational. Some soldiers are praying. A few are crying. Most are just silent. One German account, written years later, we knew we were about to do something terrible. We told ourselves it would save lives in the long run. I don't know if I believed that. I don't know if any of us did. If you know someone who needs to hear this real history, share this video. Most people have never heard what actually happened. 4:55 p.m. 5 minutes. Officers check the wind one last time. Still southwest. Still steady. Across no man's land, French soldiers are settling in. The artillery has stopped, always a sign that an infantry attack might be coming. They ready their rifles. Check their ammunition. Some of them are smoking. Some are eating. One soldier, we know from recovered letters, is writing to his mother about how quiet it's been lately, how maybe the worst is over. He'll be dead in 11 minutes. At exactly 5 p.m., a whistle blows along the German line. Soldiers in Pioneer Regiments 35 and 36 put on their masks, grip the valve handles, and on a second whistle, they turn them. All of them. At once. 5,730 cylinders. 168 tons of chlorine gas under pressure. Released in synchronization along a 4-mile front. At first, nothing. The valves are open, but the gas is still inside the cylinders. It takes a few seconds for the pressure to equalize, for the liquid chlorine to boil off into gas form. Then, a sound. Like wind through trees, but wrong. Industrial. Chemical. The gas creeps out of the pipes, heavier than air, hugging the ground. Yellow-green, thick enough to see, rolling forward at walking speed. From the German trenches, it looks almost beautiful. Like some kind of poisonous fog, flowing downhill toward the enemy positions. From the French trenches, it looks like death itself. Type the word unprepared if you can't believe the Germans weren't ready for this. The first French soldiers see it around 5:02 p.m. Brouillard. Fog. But it's a warm April evening. There's no reason for fog. And fog doesn't move uphill against the wind. One sentry, we don't know his name, runs to warn his officer. By the time he gets back to his position, the cloud is already there. The gas hits the front-line trenches at approximately 5:04 p.m. Immediate coughing. Men don't understand what's happening. This isn't smoke from artillery. This isn't tear gas. This is something else. The coughing gets worse. Becomes choking. Then not choking, drowning. Chlorine reacts with moisture. Eyes, nose, mouth, lungs. In your lungs, it mixes with water and becomes hydrochloric acid. Your body recognizes this as a threat and tries to flush it out by producing more fluid, which just creates more acid. You drown in your own secretions while your lung tissue dissolves from the inside. The first men die within 90 seconds of exposure. The sound is what breaks people who witness this. Not screaming. You can't scream when you're drowning. A wet, rattling sound. Thousands of men simultaneously unable to breathe. Some soldiers run. They claw their way out of trenches and sprint toward the rear. German machine gunners watch them come. Some fire. Some don't. Because what they're seeing is so horrifying that even shooting at them feels redundant. Some soldiers stay. They don't know what else to do. A few try to hold their breath. Doesn't work. The gas is too persistent, and eventually you have to breathe. Some soak cloth in water and press it to their faces. This actually helps a little. Not much, but enough that a few men survive who otherwise wouldn't have. And some, like Armand Lapointe, make a choice that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. They soak their handkerchiefs in urine. Someone, somewhere, shouts that urine might neutralize the gas. It's partially true. Urea does react with chlorine. But it's not enough. Not nearly enough. Lapointe presses urine-soaked cloth to his face and watches men die around him. The trenches empty. Not all at once, in waves. As the gas rolls through, men evacuate in whichever direction seems safest. Most run west, toward the rear. Some run north or south, trying to get around the cloud. A few run east, toward the German lines, because anything is better than staying in that cloud. By 5:30 p.m., the French Colonial line has collapsed. Not from military pressure, from chemical terror. A 4-mile section of the Western Front, held by approximately 10,000 troops, is now empty. The Germans can't believe it. Officers use field telephones to report back, enemy positions abandoned. Minimal resistance. Proceeding with advance. At 5:35 p.m., German infantry receive orders to advance. They're terrified. Even with masks, even knowing the gas is supposed to be cleared by now, they're terrified. Because they watched what it did. And now they have to walk through the aftermath. The first German soldiers cross no man's land and enter the French trenches. What they find breaks some of them. Bodies. Hundreds of bodies. Some dead. Some technically alive but drowning in their own fluids, making sounds that don't seem human. And the smell. Chlorine mixed with blood, mixed with vomit, mixed with everything else. One German soldier's account, I put my hand on a man's shoulder to check if he was alive. He was sitting upright, back against the trench wall. When I touched him, yellow-green foam poured out of his mouth. His eyes were open. I still don't know if he was dead or dying. The German advance continues. By 6 p.m., they've moved 3.5 kilometers. More than both sides combined have moved in the previous 6 months of fighting. By 7:30 p.m., They've opened a gap in the Allied line that could, potentially, allow them to reach the Channel ports. This is the breakthrough. This is what they've been dying for since August. And then they stop.
Why?
Because the German High Command didn't believe it would work. They approved the attack. They provided the resources. But they didn't position reserve troops for exploitation. They didn't have plans for what to do if the line actually collapsed. When field commanders report the breakthrough, General Headquarters' response is essentially, "Wait, seriously?" By the time they scramble reserve units forward, the Allies have already plugged the gap. Canadian troops rush in from the north. British reserves from the south. By midnight, there's a new line, thinner, more desperate, but holding. The weapon that could have won the war didn't. Because the people who built it didn't believe in it enough to plan for success. The battle continues for another month. The Germans make limited gains. Eventually, both sides stabilize around a new line that's roughly half a mile farther back than before. 5,000 dead. 15,000 wounded. Many with permanent lung damage. For half a mile. Let's talk about Armand Lapointe. He survived. Spent 6 hours in that cloud, breathing through urine-soaked cloth, watching men die. When the gas finally cleared, he stumbled to the rear and collapsed. Doctors couldn't do much. There was no treatment for chlorine exposure. They kept him hydrated, kept him breathing, and hoped his lungs would heal. They didn't. Lapointe lived until 1926. 11 years. Every single one of those years, he couldn't walk up a flight of stairs without stopping to breathe. Couldn't run. Couldn't laugh without triggering a coughing fit. His medical file, preserved in French military archives, chronic pulmonary edema, chlorine exposure, Ypres 1915. He wasn't special. Thousands of men who survived the gas spent the rest of their short lives unable to breathe properly. And the psychological damage was worse than the physical. Soldiers who'd survived gas attacks developed what doctors called gas neurosis, a constant paranoia that the air itself was trying to kill them. They'd smell something weird and panic. They'd see fog and run. They'd refuse to enter confined spaces because if the gas came, there'd be nowhere to go. Shell shock rates doubled in units that had been gassed. Because you can train a soldier to face bullets. You can't train someone to trust the air. The weapon didn't just kill. It broke people's ability to feel safe anywhere. And the worst part, it didn't even work as a military strategy. April 24, 1915, 2 days after Ypres, British troops are issued the first gas masks. Crude things, basically cotton pads and bags, but better than nothing. May 1915, the British government approves development of their own chemical weapons. Can't let the Germans have a monopoly. September 1915, the British launch their first gas attack at Loos. The wind shifts mid-attack, blows the gas back over British trenches, kills and injures more British soldiers than Germans. By 1916, both sides are using gas routinely. By 1918, they've moved on to mustard gas, which is worse because it doesn't just attack your lungs. It blisters your skin. It blinds you. It soaks into your uniform and keeps burning for hours. Total chemical weapon casualties by the end of the war, 100,000 dead, 1.3 million injured. And the thing is, it never actually changed the outcome of any major battle. It just made everything more terrible. Fritz Haber was promoted for Ypres, given the Iron Cross, hailed as a hero of the Reich. He came home to Berlin on May 2, 1915. His wife, Clara, had spent the previous 10 days arguing with him by telegram, begging him to stop the project, to see what he was doing. The night he returned, May 2, 1915, they had dinner. Accounts vary on what was said. Some sources claim they argued. Others say they barely spoke. What we know for certain, early morning of May 3rd, Clara Immerwahr took her husband's service pistol, walked into their garden, and shot herself in the heart. Their 13-year-old son, Hermann, found her body. Haber attended a brief funeral, then returned to the front to oversee the next gas attack. Years later, Hermann Haber wrote, "My father's work killed my mother. He never admitted it, but he knew." Here's what they don't teach you in history class. In 1918, Near the end of the war, a young German corporal was caught in a British mustard gas attack near Ypres, the same sector where it all began. He was temporarily blinded, hospitalized. While recovering in a military hospital in Pasewalk, he learned that Germany had surrendered. His name was Adolf Hitler. Hitler never forgot the gas attack. In Mein Kampf, he wrote about it, about the terror of blindness, about feeling helpless, about the humiliation of Germany's defeat while he lay in a hospital bed unable to see. And here's the truly sick irony. In 1933, when Hitler came to power, one of his early acts was to award Fritz Haber, who was Jewish, a full state pension for his invaluable service to the German Reich during the Great War. Haber fled anyway. He knew what was coming. By 1933, he was a pariah in his own country. The man who'd sacrificed his wife, his conscience, and his scientific integrity to prove he was German enough, wasn't German enough after all. He died in exile in Basel, Switzerland, in January 1934. Alone. Broken. Defending his work until the end. The man who invented industrial-scale chemical warfare helped create the weapon that traumatized the man who would try to exterminate his people. You can't write fiction darker than that. And the weapon itself. In 1925, the Geneva Protocol banned chemical weapons in warfare. 128 countries signed it. Every major power agreed, never again. And they kept that promise. Sort of. Chemical weapons weren't used in combat during World War II. Not in Europe, anyway. Not because of morality. Because of fear. Fear that if you used it, the other side would use it back. Mutually assured suffering. But they were manufactured, stockpiled, prepared for use the moment the other side broke the rules. The taboo held. Barely. Fritz Haber thought he was shortening the war. Thought he was saving lives. Thought he was serving his country. What he actually did was prove that there's no line humans won't cross if they can rationalize it as necessity. Ypres wasn't the first chemical attack in history. Ancient armies poisoned wells. Medieval sieges used burning sulfur. But Ypres was the first industrial-scale deployment of chemistry as a weapon of mass terror. It was the moment when science stopped being neutral and became complicit. And once that line was crossed, it stayed crossed. The first gas attack at Ypres wasn't just about 5,000 dead soldiers. It was about crossing a line that every civilization before 1915 had known existed but had never fully stepped over. Before Ypres, warfare had rules. Written rules. Unwritten rules. Things you just didn't do because everyone understood that if you did, the enemy would do them back, and soon you're fighting a war where nothing is off limits. After Ypres, those rules became suggestions. Because once one side uses gas, the other side has to use it too or accept permanent disadvantage. And once both sides are using it, someone invents a worse version. And then someone else invents something worse than that. Chlorine, phosgene, mustard gas. Each one more horrible than the last. Fritz Haber believed he was being pragmatic, that he was making hard choices in service of a greater good. What he didn't understand, or refused to understand, is that some choices can't be justified by outcomes. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. Clara Haber understood that. It's why she called it a perversion of science. It's why she killed herself rather than live with what her husband had done. The weapon he created didn't shorten the war. It extended it. It made it more terrible. It ensured that every future war would have fewer moral limits than the last. And the men who survived, men like Armand Lapointe, who spent the rest of his life unable to breathe properly, they were the living proof that some victories aren't worth their cost. If this changed how you see World War I, hit like. Here's my question for you. Was Fritz Haber a patriot trying to save German lives, or a war criminal who invented industrial murder? Leave your answer in the comments. And subscribe, because next week I'm covering the mustard gas attack at Passchendaele in 1917, where they learned that chlorine was just the beginning, and what happened made Ypres look like a mercy killing. But chlorine gas wasn't the worst chemical weapon of World War I. Not even close. That story, the one about mustard gas, where men's skin melted off while they were still alive, where blindness and burns lasted for decades, where survivors begged for the quick death that chlorine provided, That video is on your screen now. Because once they crossed that line at Ypres, there was no bottom to how far they'd go.